Hello, everyone, and welcome to News Today. We are going to talk about the key events of 18th December, the main headlines, the big issues of the day. I'll first read out the headlines. So, the main news today is the Parliamentary Select Committee report on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Bill 2025. Then, India added to 2,362 megawatt of biomass and 222 uh, 228 megawatt of waste to energy capacity in the last 10 years. After that, we have Niti Aayog releases a report on public research and development institutes in India. And finally, we talk about India reported the highest anti-doping rule violation for the third consecutive year. Further, there are some quick updates which we'll discuss. So the first one is MH-60R Seahawk helicopter. Then Prime Minister's visit to Ethiopia. After that, the increasing India's global increase in India's coal demand. Then we'll talk about NATO. Then you have the Kessler syndrome. After this, multi-lane free flow tolling system. And we have the Great Nicobar Island Development Area that has been notified. Then you have weakly interacting massive particles. And finally, there is a defense exercise, Exercise Desert Cyclone 2. So we will talk about all of these one by one. Let's start with the first issue at hand. The first one here is Parliamentary Select Committee report on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Bill. Now, this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, since the time it has been formulated, it has been in news because this is kind of a new systemic regulation which we've brought in for issues of bankruptcy and the whole thing about regularizing debt in corporate sector. And there is an amendment which has been brought into it. And to discuss those amendments, to see if those amendments should be in place and further to give suggestions, we have a Parliamentary Select Committee report which has come out. So through this report, we'll be able to understand the issue and understand what has been suggested. Now, first of all, please understand this, that who would require this insolvency and bankruptcy rule. So, any company which is struggling, any company which is not able to pay its debt, it is in a situation of crisis, it's not doing financially well, that company can declare itself as bankrupt. That okay, that has to be legally accepted, legally defined, that okay, now this company does not have money to pay anyone, and that can lead to shutdown of that enterprise. Now, there are a set of regulations which have been in place under this code, and some key amendments have been brought into it. The first amendment is that there is introduction of CRIP, or the full form of this is going to be Creditor Initiated Insolvency Resolution Process. So this is basically going to be like, in the most simplified terms, if I can tell you, this is going to be like an out-of-court settlement. So this is an out-of-court initiation mechanism specifically targeted at resolving issues, resolving cases of genuine business failures. See, the problem with this system is that sometimes it takes a very long time. The whole process which goes into it, the legal process through the courts, it takes a lot of time. So this code is really trying to bring down the time or have a fixed time limit for how it should be done. So this is one of the amendments which are going to come in that regard. After that, the next thing is that they are going to talk about two type of frameworks in this, two critical areas which are crucial because the structure of different kinds of businesses which run in India, they are different. So this is trying to talk about all of those comprehensively. First is Group insolvency framework, where multiple entities are involved. There's a complex corporate framework here. Multiple people are involved in running that business. For them, you have the group insolvency framework, and then you have the cross-border insolvency framework. In a lot of businesses, what happens is that there are people from different countries, foreign companies, foreign groups, or maybe Indian companies having intermediaries in other countries. So that kind of a combination where it is cross border and the rules might be different at different places. So this is trying to systematically arrange that also and create a cross border insolvency framework. Now, these are the two key things which this amendment is specifically bringing, and the Parliamentary Select Committee has assessed this whole thing and they've given their own recommendations. So let's look at what their recommendations is. This gives you an opportunity to analyze it. Like a lot of times, specifically in the mains exam, there is always this question, what do you think about the amendments, and what should be improved in this, what is missing in this. So this kind of a thought process will be very helpful in those kind of answers. Now, the recommendations of the committee is, first is the clean state principle. That, once you do everything, once you apply this, so there will be a need to codify a clean slate, that whatever prior claims are there, they have to be extinguished. That, okay, everything is settled. So that has to be, that principle should be incorporated. That is what the committee is saying. Then the second point which they have brought out is that there is a conflict of interest here. So what's happening is, there are these two terms. Please try and understand. First is a resolution professional. So a resolutioner professional will be appointed. Like suppose there's a company, they've taken a loan from the bank. So the bank will appoint a resolutional professional who will look at how the company is running, its overall managerial work, and how best they can clear their debt to whoever they owe money, how that whole thing can be managed. That's the job of a resolution professional. So resolution professional who conducts insolvency resolution process for the corporate debtor shall be ineligible to be appointed as the liquidator if the process fails. So the idea is, insolvency would be a situation where you are still trying to manage, you're still trying to gather, maybe shut down a few things, reduce expenses, manage finances. So that is there. When it doesn't work, when it fails, that's when you say that, okay, now this company, nothing is working, it's going to be bankrupt. Now, after bankruptcy, you will have a liquidator, a person who is going to, sell this company or break this company down. And what happens is that this liquidator, the person who does that, arranges that whole situation, will get a stake, will get some money out of that liquidation process. Like let's say the company is getting dismantled or breaking down for 100 crore rupees. So some part of that goes to this person who is the liquidator, who is supposed to look at all of this thing. In a lot of cases, what happens is that the person who is the resolution professional, that person ends up being the liquidator. Now, the committee very rightly has pointed out that this is a conflict. If this person knows, so this is a salaried person, okay, the resolution professional. If this person knows that he can make a lot more money as a liquidator, if this insolvency thing fails, then he might have a bias towards getting the company there and not working properly in that whole insolvency procedure. So this is a conflict of interest. So whoever is the resolution professional should not be allowed to later on become the liquidator. Right? This is one key committee recommendation here. Then there is a timeline which needs to be set up. So the specific statutory timeline of 3 months for the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. So after everything is done, there is a concept that you can appeal. Okay, you can appeal against the process, and that sometimes takes a very long time. So they have like stipulated that, okay, you set up a fixed time that it is going to be in 3 months that all appeals are going to be tackled. And the corporate debtor. Now, this term needs clarification. Like we were mentioning earlier, that there are foreign companies, there are again Indian companies with foreign intermediaries. So, the system becomes complex. So, they are saying that this needs clarity. That which is the company which is involved, who has taken debt, which all agencies are a part of it. Clarify the term corporate debtor to include any person incorporated with limited liability outside India, ensure cross-border provisions legally apply to the foreign company. So that whole thing, it can be arranged once you know that who all will qualify for this corporate debtor. So these are all very meaningful suggestions, which, if incorporated, can make the law more stronger and more helpful in the long run. So this is the matter of discussion here. We are going to move on to the next article, which is on bioenergy. A very key, very significant concept from the point of view of the exam. Also, there have been number of questions on these kind of ideas in prelims and in mains. So here, this is specifically talking about India has added 2,362 megawatt of biomass and 228 megawatt of waste to energy capacity in the last 10 years. So we've done a lot of progress. We've worked towards this production of bioenergy, biofuels, different forms of biological resources. So that is why this is being highlighted. So let's understand what is bioenergy specifically. Bioenergy is a source of energy from the organic material that makes up plants, known as biomass. So bio basically means something which you're getting from living things. And here primarily it's going to be plants. So things like wood, dung, charcoal, a lot of wastes, right from vegetable waste, household waste, agriculture waste, all of that is what is having a potential of being used as an energy source. So that is bioenergy. Then currently the status in India, the total installed capacity is 11.6 gigawatt. So this is a very latest statistic. So November 2025. And if we look at the overall energy consumption, so this is saying 13% of India's total final energy consumption that is coming from bioenergy. So this is a substantial figure, but it still has a lot more potential to grow. We'll talk about what has contributed to this. Like there are government programs which have worked very well to have this increase or have this massive share of bioenergy. Let's look into that. The main program, the key highlight here is the National Bioenergy Program. Okay, so this is, there's this phase one of this program going on. So this started in 21 to 21-22 to 25-26 was the timeline of bioenergy program. Objective of this is that any surplus biomass which you have, that should be used for power generation. Now, because a lot of this, the raw material for producing bioenergy is coming from agriculture households, and in India, we have this challenge of agriculture being done on smaller land holdings, and that is going to limit the income of farmers. So this becomes an excellent way of additional income for rural households. That even their waste and left out things, which in itself managing and decomposing or throwing away is a problem. Now that can be a source of revenue. There are a few aspects here, a few sub schemes which are trying to work around this bioenergy through different aspects, different angles. First is waste to energy production. So waste to energy program. So in this, everything from urban areas, industrial and agriculture wastes and residue, all of that combined together, that is going to be incorporated into production of energy. So from waste, you channelize it, you make energy. Then you have the biomass program. So here, production of biomass itself. First, that is kind of the first step here. So you have briquettes, you have petals, and all of this collection of production of biomass. That's the next scheme. Now they specifically mentioned non-bagasse based cogeneration. So bagasse is basically the residue of sugarcane. That in itself is a very big biomass waste. So here they've mentioned that without that also, all other things also, you have a separate system for producing, for collecting that, using that, and producing energy. Then you have biogas. Biogas, here they've defined biogas also. So this is methane. What is biogas? So you can gasify the waste. So methane plus carbon dioxide with traces of some other gases like nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and oxygen. That is what is biogas. So you can produce energy directly from the waste, you can collect it, you can use it as biomass, or you can gasify it and make biogas. All these three aspects are there as sub schemes to the National Bioenergy Program. Further, we also have a few other initiatives which you should know about. First, here is the national policy on biofuels. So, different sources can be used for producing biofuels, and now what is being said is that from biofuels you make biodiesel, you make ethanol, from biological sources, bioethanol we call it. So there are targets that they are going to be mixed with your regular fuel, your petrol or diesel. So 5% biodiesel blending by 2030, that's a target, and 20% ethanol blending by 25-26. So this, we are already there. Okay, this is being done. Then you have Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Yojana, financial support for advanced biofuel projects. There are projects of having different generations of biofuels. It's like in the earliest process when biofuels were being produced, they were produced from food crops. Now we are trying to do it from drier crops or waste products. So that's the advanced project which will come into this. Then you have SATAT, which is sustainable alternative towards affordable transportation. See, for all of these concepts, or the idea that biofuel is going to be used, the key thing is that this is affordable. You already have the material, you already have the waste, you already have the residue, and it's also cleaner. Because if you leave that biomass, okay, if you let it to decompose, it is going to release a lot of carbon emission. Now you are not letting it release carbon emission, but you're utilizing that, right? So that in that sense becomes cleaner. And for development today, one of the biggest necessity is that your fuel should not be polluting. You should have cleaner sources, and you should have alternative sources for energy security. So this is a very brilliant idea in that sense. Then you also have one more scheme, which is the Gobar Dhan scheme. So this is galvanizing organic bio-agro resources. So it's just different schemes targeting different aspects of the broader idea. So if you understand the broader idea, then you will appreciate the fact that how this growth in the last 10 years is so significant. And further, with the use of these schemes, we can expect more increase in production. Moving ahead, we are going to talk about Niti Aayog's report. So Niti Aayog releases a report on public research and development institutions in India. For any country to progress, it has to be up to date in its technology, it has to innovate, and research and development is a very key area there. So this is Niti Aayog as an analytical organization is working here for understanding the situation of research and development in India. And not only that, along with their assessment, they also give recommendations that what should be done. That's how you make a comprehensive report. So let's first look at the status. So status here is first gross expenditure. So this has reached 2 lakh crores in 20 2020, 2021, which is an eightfold increase since the last 2 decades. So there's substantial increase. So earlier it was, in money, it might seem huge, but when you compare it to the GDP of a country, it was 0.6% earlier. Now it is 0.7%. Though this has increased, that's a promising thing, but still, overall, if we compare to global statistics, it is still very low. Like in the most advanced countries, they're spending at least 2% of their GDP on research and development. So here we are still less than 1. Then funding sources. Now, this money which is going into research and development, 63% of this is coming from government sources. Okay, so the majority of research and development is still in public sector, still in the government sector. Then sectorally, like which areas is more research happening on? So here you have agriculture, right? Agriculture dominates every aspect of our economy. So research also is mainly in agriculture and agriculture related areas, and which is followed by health and IT and telecom sector. Okay, so IT industry also is huge for India, so that's another area which is there. Then you have geographical concentration. Now, even when research is happening or increasing or growing, it's not uniformly increasing. There are certain areas which are doing most of our research. Like here, they've said is the southern region of the country, the southern states. So that is doing around 36% of all research. So all the research institutions are there. And areas like northeast, they are very underrepresented. So think about 36, and here 1.8% only. 1.8% of the research and development institutions are in the northeastern region. So this is creating a disparity. Then city level clusters. About 48% of the total central research and development institutions are hosted within the 10 most populous cities of India. So almost half of these research institutions, they are only in 10 cities. Just 10 cities with all the research. Think about how many cities India has. So this is also a very clustered kind of approach, which again points to the geographic imbalances. Now, what are the recommendations here? Let's go through this first, that what are the challenges, then we'll see what Niti Aayog has recommended, because they're all going to be aligned, right? First is stagnant research and development expenditure. This is what I told you, way below global levels. Then low per capita investment, far behind than other emerging economies. Okay, so if you look at the per capita, like we have a lot of people also, so that number becomes more disadvantageous. Then low private sector contribution. Okay, so 36%, like more than 60% was in government sector, so only 36% is still in private sector. And if you really want any sector to grow, to progress, you need private enterprise, you need private expertise, you need innovation and funds very significantly coming from the private sector. Then poor industry synergy. The top institutes are not related with industrial hubs. This is another issue, that even when we are doing research and development, is that reaching our industrial centers? Are the industries producing the products on which research is happening? There's a lot of gaps. Sometimes it takes many, many years for something which has been researched and proven to actually go to our industrial hub and be marketed as a commercial product. So this is another mismatch which is there. Now we'll see what Niti Aayog is saying. So Niti Aayog is saying proximity should be there to industrial sector. Like if there is a coal industry somewhere, then you should have coal-based research institutions in that region, so that they can collaborate. Then you have centralized research hubs to enable resource sharing. There should be a cross-industry collaboration and pool of expertise around multiple industrial locations. Okay, so you should have like one centralized system which should know, which should have resources, which should have manpower, which can then have like a cross exchange. Collaborative spaces, this is the same idea to foster interaction between researchers of different industries wherever collaboration or in sync working is present. We can also talked about this industrial liaison program of MIT, which is doing a similar thing. Then create technology transfer offices. You should have like a streamlined system for technology transfer. So research and development is creating your technology, then you want to transfer this technology to different companies so that it can reach the market, because that's the ultimate goal. Just doing research is not just for the sake of research doing, right? You do this research, you work on this research so that it leads to something useful, it improves the life of human beings, here particularly India. Going on further, okay, India reported the highest anti-doping rule violation for the third consecutive time. So this is related to our sports administration overall, and you might have heard about doping. Let's see what is doping. And India is not doing very well when it comes to doping. There are a lot of violations which are happening with the Indian players. So doping means you add any kind of a product, you take any kind of a substance which will enhance your process, which will enhance your performance in a way which is not permitted. Some chemicals can be taken for that, for enhancing performance. These are a few examples just to give you a sense about how this works. Okay, different kinds of athletes, you can use different products, like you have androgenic agents. This I'm sure everybody's heard about. People talk about taking steroids, so that increases muscle mass and overall strength. An athlete can have a uh, uh, you can say a wrong kind of advantage here. Then you have stimulants which can be taken, which increase alertness and focus, endurance, raise heart rate. Then there's an interesting idea of taking diuretics and masking agents. What these diuretics do is they'll help in removing those drugs from the body. Like how the authorities will come to know that there is a doping agent is that they're going to do a test, right? They'll do a blood test, they'll do a urine test, and they'll see what all is present. So there are agents which can actually remove those things quickly from your body or mask them. That okay, if you take this, then the main doping agent which you are using, that will not be found. So that could be used. So now the authorities also have smartly identified that if they started checking for these kind of things. Okay, if diuretic is there, it has taken, that means he has taken something, so that the main doping agent will not be identified. Then you have peptide hormones, which can boost red blood cells. That means overall endurance. Red blood cells help to provide oxygen, which improves the way the energy supply will work in the body. Then you have glucocorticoid. It's an anti-inflammatory agent which can suppress pain. It can also help mask injuries. Then you have beta blockers, which will lower heart rate, reduce hand tremors, make you more stable. So again, that could be taken. Depending on what sport it is, different kinds of doping agents are available, right? And there is an organization whose sole purpose is to study these doping agents, make a list, do those testing, and that is the World Anti-Doping Agency. This World Anti-Doping Agency, it has its headquarters in Montreal in Canada. It was established in 1999, and its key function is to publish the World Anti-Doping Code and prohibited list. Basically, what all things you cannot use, they are going to do that. Now, in their report, it has come that India has the highest number of violations. And this is consecutively for the third time in 3 years that Indian athletes are failing these doping tests, and it's actually a sad thing that we have the highest number of violations. So this is just to give you a sense of the violation. You don't need to know these figures, but just to get an idea. So 260 Indian athletes have tested positive for different doping agents, and they tested more than 7,000 samples. And this was analyzed by the National Anti-Doping Agency. Okay, so this is the analysis happening in India, but then the report has to be shared globally. So this is the positivity ratio is 3.6. So 3.6% of all athletes who are going to take this test are going to fail, right? That's the highest in the world. Highest in the world. And this means that nearly 1 in every 5 Indian athlete is tested. So before all competitions, they're supposed to be tested. So 1 in 5, they are going to test positive. Okay, that means we need to be more stringent. We need to have better rules for this system. Now, there are a few measures which are in place. So first is, of course, the National Anti-Doping Agency is there, and there's also an act. Okay. So this is the National Anti-Doping Act of 2022. So this will provide the whole framework for how the doping agency will work. Then there are also digital interventions which can help people be aware of what they are taking. And one is Know Your Medicine app. So this allows users to check their medicine. If they're taking some kind of medicine, they should know that what all it has and if that could impact their doping. Now, why is this problematic, right? That's the key question. We've discussed regulation, we discussed it's happening, but why is it problematic? Why is this unfair advantage a bad thing? Let's discuss this aspect of doping. So first is ethical implication. Okay, it kind of breaks and violates the integrity of the sport. So against all those people who are working hard, here is another person who has just taken a medicine and then he's doing the same kind of work, right? So that's not fair. Then there are health impacts also. Some of these medicines, like steroids, taken in the long term, they can have very serious implications on the health. Then impacts on athlete. So this, once you found of doping, it damages the person's reputation, right? So socially also, this is not something which will be looked on with kindness. Then you have governance issues. Now this makes, managing of different sporting events difficult, and social overall there is an impact of trust on the society. Like if you have so many doping cases, it kind of normalizes this as an act of cheating. It's basically an act of cheating. So that means the overall quality of youth who are participating here, that's degrading. So that's a bad indication again. So this is the moral ethical implication of the whole situation. Moving to our last big news of the day. So this is Parliamentary Committee on Empowerment of Women released Safety and Protection of Women in Unorganized Sector report. Now, a lot of you, while going through these news articles might be wondering that why do we need so many reports? Do we really need to know about all these reports? See, the report particularly or the specifics might not be that significant, and you may or may not remember all of them, right? Because there might be so much. But as an issue, as a topic, it becomes significant. The nuance of it, what it is trying to say, what it is trying to point out, that might be pointing out towards a issue which the government is discussing or the government is worried about, and an issue which will show up in your question paper. So the content which you get from these reports, that is what is important, rather than the specifics of the name of the report or who did the report or what. That is additional. If you can remember, that's wonderful. If you can directly quote from a report, you definitely make a better impression on the examiner, especially in the mains exam. But the content, that is the key. Your understanding of issues, that is what is the key here. So just look at it. Such a detailed table explaining the issue with recommendations. So what area is it? So you're talking about women. their safety in unorganized sector where there is no formal recording, no company, no corporate governance, nothing like that. So in all those unorganized sectors, what are the issues and what is the recommendation of this report? Okay, we'll talk about that. What is the committee saying? So first is interstate migrant workmen. So contribution of women migrant workers remains invisible, exposing them to exploitation. So women migrants, they're not really accounted for, and that's why it is an opportunity of exploitation. And what can be done is strengthen Interstate Migrant Workmen Act by creating a national digital database. So it can be linked to things like e-shram and women migrants specifically if they are accounted for, if they are in a database, it might be easier to keep them safe. Then you have the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandan scheme. Now, this is talking about regional gaps in enrolling of women. So, we have a scheme, but the issue here is that women are not properly enrolled in it. Their numbers are low, especially in certain areas like Lakshadweep and Sikkim, the very low numbers. So, here the suggestion is that at district level, you should have dedicated enrollment drives through women-led networks. There are self-help groups, Anganwadi, Asha workers. Through them, you should encourage women enrollment so that women can also get the benefit of this scheme. Then you have another act, Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace. So Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. Now, there is a need, this act is in place, but in many areas it's still non-functional because of lack of proper awareness about this. So the first suggestion here is that the local committees which have to be set up, full functionality should be there, and you should have one-stop centers and district legal authorities to support inclusion of domestic workers under labor protection. Domestic workers or the workers, household workers, the female household workers, that's a big part of your unorganized sector women workforce. Then you have the Palna scheme under Mission Shakti. So till now in this scheme, only 6.24% of the allocated funds are utilized. Number again, like I've said, not important, but remember, this is insignificant. That's what you remember, that funding is not being used from this scheme. So they were supposed to set an Anganwadi cum crèche center. They had to be operational, but even approval is very low. 14,000 around have been approved, and only around 2,425 are working. Now, this was important because with women, childcare is also involved. So, crèches are needed. So, budget execution has to be proper and faster operationalization has to be done. This is the recommendation. Okay, so this article in that sense is bringing your attention to a number of schemes which the whole thing has been assessed by the parliamentary committee, and you will get a sense of this very niche topic, which is women safety in unorganized sector. With this, we finish our main news, and we are going to talk about the quick updates. Some key terms, key events in news where we don't need a lot of detail, but we should be familiar with them. Let's see. What are those quick updates for us? Okay, so MH-60R Seahawk helicopter. So this is a helicopter. We are getting this from USA. So Lockheed Martin is the company in USA which we are getting this helicopter from, and we already had one. This is the second one which has been commissioned. What kind of a helicopter this is? Multi-mission maritime helicopter. Maritime associated with the Navy, and this has been commissioned from INS Hansa. So what is INS Hansa? This is the Indian Navy's premier air station which is near Goa. So this actually works in collaboration with the Goa airport. This is, so you should be familiar here with INS Hansa. This is the Navy's air station, and the name of the helicopter, Seahawk helicopter, naval helicopter. We are getting it from USA. Then the Prime Minister recently is on a visit to Ethiopia. So Ethiopia is an African country. Whenever you read about any country, any place, please look at that nation at the map, and its location is very important. And if you've been following the news the last few months, you will be aware with the idea that India is really encouraging its partnership with the African nations, Ethiopia being one of them. Our Prime Minister, he's visiting there. He's also been given the highest honor of Ethiopia. So that kind of shows a promised bit towards India-Ethiopia relationship. So next is rising India's coal demand. So we have the International Energy Agency. So what this has said is its latest report, that's the reason why this is in news, is that India's coal demand is expected to grow 3% annually over the next 4 years. So we are already using a lot of coal, like India's coal share is around 70% right now. And there is this hope that it can be reduced or should be reduced to 60% by 2030. But the projections are the demand might actually increase if all those interventions which are needed to shift to alternate sources of energy. The primary use of coal is in thermal power plants. So that is a thing which we need to address. Then you have the notification of this Great Nicobar Island Development Area. Now, this is a part of a bigger project. So there is the Great Nicobar Holistic Development Project, which is talking about overall development of the Great Nicobar region. So they are talking about having an international container transshipment terminal. Okay. Containers are for transporting goods across the sea. So this is like a commercial enterprise. Then an international airport. So that maybe you can encourage tourism here. Then a power plant and a township. Now, this growth is a promising concept of development, but there is a lot of opposition, a lot of discussion happening on this because there are indigenous tribal communities who live here whose livelihood might get impacted with this kind of a development. Then you have weakly interacting massive particles. Now, there's something called dark matter. This is related to that. When I say dark matter, it means that it does not have light, it does not emit light. So we can't see it. Whatever is dark matter, we can't see it. But it can experience or it can have other kinds of forces like gravity. Gravity is what with which things are pulled, right? If I throw a ball, it's going to come down. That's gravity. So in the universe also, this gravitational force can be felt. That's how we know something is there. But because it's not emitting light, we can't see that. So this dark matter, because we can't visualize it, it's a big mystery to us. But certain scientists are claiming that they've identified something which will explain dark matter, and that is weakly interacting massive particles. So this is a hypothetical concept where they say that they are electrically neutral particles proposed as leading candidates. So they are saying these particles are what are making dark matter. They are electrically neutral, they don't absorb, they don't emit light, they interact very weakly with other particles, but when they collide, they can annihilate and produce gamma rays. So basically, if they'll collide, they'll produce gamma rays, and we can detect those gamma rays and then learn more about them. So this is a concept, a hypothetical idea. Until proven, it's going to be hypothetical. But if this is proven, then this will explain what dark matter is, what it is made up of. Then you have a military exercise. Exercise Desert Cyclone 2. So India, UAE join military exercise. So we keep coming across different kind of military engagements. So this is between India and UAE, which is currently happening in Abu Dhabi. So make a list. For this, I always say, please make a list. Name of the exercise, which countries are involved. It's a very possible prelims question. Then you have NATO. Now this is a American, tropical American, South America, Mexico, those kind of places. Their plant, and this has natural carotenoids, which they've given the name also, name of the plant, Bixa orellana shrub. And its uses are, it's used as a food color, chemical laying, coating of medicines, dyeing, food coloring, hair coloring, polishing, all of that. That is its role. And why it's in news is because India is, like, you have CSIR. This is the main organization which is talking about this plant and talking about research and study into this particular product which is coming out of this plant. Then you have the Kessler syndrome. So this is an old concept. Don Kessler predicted in 1978 that a single collision in orbits triggers a chain reaction of space debris strikes. Why this is in news is because, again, somebody has pointed out that we can have the Kessler syndrome or crashing of satellites. What happens is basically, like in all around the Earth, different satellites are going around in orbit. After the satellite's function is over, some parts of the satellite, some parts of the fuel, some left out portions, they're all left, which are collected as space debris. They are there in the space. They're not coming down. Some of them might come down also, fall down, break down, burn out, but some things will still be left. And this idea of Kessler syndrome is that if any of these two, they collide, then they can all start hitting each other, and it'll be like, because two will hit, it'll create a force, they'll go in different directions, then they'll hit other such debris, and it'll start a chain reaction. So something like this can happen, and if this happens, it'll be very damaging to the satellites which are still there and which are still operational. The last topic of discussion, a multi-lane free flow tolling system. So there is a nationwide rollout of a multi-lane free flow tolling system, which will work with artificial intelligence, overall management of highways, and it should be completed by the end of 2026. So currently how tolling is working, I'm sure everybody understand this, that there is a toll, they put in a barrier, you stop there, from your fast card money is deducted, and then you can go ahead. Here the concept is that you don't stop. It's going to be a free flow where you might be, there might be a toll, but you might be running at 60 kilometers, 80 kilometers through that toll, but still it will work. You don't have to pause. So it's a seamless system which we are trying to create. This will work with artificial intelligence based number plates. So the number plates are going to be scanned. They'll have the information. Then you'll have satellite tracking. Satellites will take that information, and along with the information on the fast tracks, the whole thing will automatically collect the toll without having the vehicle to stop. So this is what is the goal, what is being trying to done, and ambitiously the target is the end of 2026, where this would be applied everywhere. This is all about our discussion today. After you've seen this discussion, please go through the news today, read through all the aspects, take a few minutes with it. It'll sink in the whole thing, right? After listening to a discussion, it becomes easier to absorb the information. And once you've done that, go solve the MCQs. That will further help you remember and recall things better. And for any of these topics, if you want to read more, if you want to learn more, please visit Vision IAS Digital Current Affairs website. It has a lot of different topics. These topics, you'll find them in more detail there. Do check it out. Thank you.